everybody. Thank you for allowing me to speak today this way. When I told people that I actually wanted to do this, I got some really, like, you're crazy looks. So I hope I don't regret it, and I hope you don't regret letting me be up here. And Ross, I had nothing to do with those baseball connotations that Cindy came up with. So as Kathleen said, we've been talking about the mission work that comes out of this church for weeks now. And when thinking about HomeFirst, I've talked to quite a few groups about what we do, but when I thought about doing it here, I just thought, let's wrap it into the message. It just felt like the right thing to do. So I want to talk to you about HomeFirst today, which, for those of you who don't know, it's an affordable housing nonprofit that started here with members of this church. But I also want to talk to you about love. So I'll start at the beginning of the story. Several people from Lafayette Park were involved in Kathleen's several week-long discussions on poverty. And after those several weeks were finished, we all just knew way too much to just kind of sit back. We learned a lot of facts about what it would be like to live in poverty. Things that I have never had to and hope to never have to experience myself. I grew up never having to worry about if I was going to get to eat dinner or where I was going to sleep tonight. So thanks, Mom and Dad, for that. But I now know adults and kids, who are never going to get to say the same when they're my age. So that was about 4 years ago. I can't really restate any of the raw facts that we learned from that, but I absolutely still feel that feeling that we had to do something. And when I say do something, I mean actually solve a problem, not just put a Band-Aid on it. So in 2011, we began talking about the idea of doing the hardest thing, helping homeless people get homes. And not just any homeless people, the ones that very few were helping, single men. And not just getting them homes, but keeping them on track to keep those homes. HomeFirst bought our first property in 2012 and started renovations with the help of many of you out there, whether it was your time, your skills, or your donations. It took countless hours of planning to get this thing off the ground, but at its simplest form, weren't we just deciding to love people? I mean, in the beginning, we didn't even know who we were going to help exactly. Sure, we knew the general target group, but we didn't know Brian or Daryl or Dwayne or Ronald. But we spent years working towards making a better life possible for them. Why would we do that? Because we're called to love. But an even more pressing question, before knowing who they were, how did we know that they would deserve our help? You want to know something really great? It doesn't matter. And isn't that a relief? We don't have to be the judge of who deserves love. I will say, though, even if we did have to decide, our tenants are wonderful, and they're hardworking, and they do deserve it. In thinking about the Good Samaritan story that we just heard, I know that most of us would probably say we want to be the one helping that person in need. What do we know about the guy who was beat up, though? We don't really know anything about him, and I did some pretty extensive Google searches. Some scholars say that we think he was a Jew, but we don't really know anything really about the guy who was beat up. And I really think that that's intentional, because we don't need to know. Maybe he's a Nobel Peace Prize winner. Maybe he's an alcoholic. Maybe he's a father. Jesus never called out conditions for showing love to one another. Matthew chapter 5 states, "For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even tax collectors do the same?" HomeFirst wanted to offer a realistic, supportive home for people who couldn't find it anywhere else. We housed our first resident, Brian, in 2013, and our second, Daryl, that same year. With Dwayne and now Ronald moved in, we now have our first 4-family property full and 4 people on their way to a sustainably better life. Ron, I'm going to call you out. Will you stand? This is our newest resident, Ronald, and my expectations have already been blown about what you're able to, to do after being in the tough conditions that you've been in. Ronald started at Bridgebread, which has, I don't know without Bridgebread whether HomeFirst would be here, because 3 of our residents are employed by Bridgebread. That's how they pay the affordable rent that they have. So remember that when you buy a loaf of bread that, it's helping Ronald pay his rent. So thanks. So now I want to focus on 2 ways that we can show love. And one is through our actions. Our HomeFirst board members and volunteers make a decision to show love in action in the work that we do. Sharon puts in hours of labor at Genesis House every week so that our apartments could get finished sooner. Ross has ongoing meetings with residents as their mentor and their friend. Mary spends time paying all of our bills and keeps our books balanced. We are nonprofit managers, we're landlords, we're construction workers, we're grant writers, and most importantly, we strive to be family to our residents. We give the precious gift of our time to help people. C.S. Lewis writes about our time in the Screwtape Letters, which is a really great book if you haven't read it. So Screwtape gives advice to his devilish apprentice on how to corrupt human beings. And he says to him, "Let him have the feeling that he starts each day as the lawful possessor of 24 hours." Showing love in action is simply using the gift of time that God intended it to be used for. I've always remembered that quote, thanks to Nicole for having that book study. It makes it a lot easier to use precious time, spare time, when I remember that it really wasn't all mine to begin with. People are always asking all of us, how do you guys have time to do this? And every time I say, I have no idea. No idea. The other way to show love, and I would say the much more difficult to master of the 2, is inside of us, in our hearts and in our heads. It is one thing to do something, but another to do so in a completely non-judgmental manner and a state of pure love. It's really, really tough. My friend Kelly Hartnett wrote recently, "We don't have to agree with one another to love one another." For example, it's super hard for me to show love to people who don't like Seinfeld or St. Louis style pizza, but even those people deserve love. Handing someone a bottle of water who's begging on a hot day is a merciful act. But it's not a fully loving act if we have judgmental thoughts in our heads while we're doing it. Or when we're serving on the line at the bridge and wonder, why does that guy have an iPhone and need food assistance? I think that as sinners, it's something that we will grapple with our entire lives. But there is something to be said that we recognize it and we work to change it each time that it happens. I think that HomeFirst demonstrates both types of love. We have honest conversations with our residents about what they've been through without judgment. That is love. When Dwayne started passing his high school equivalency tests week after week, Ross and I got to share in his excitement over the phone right after it happened. That is love. Yesterday at Bridgebread, I can't remember exactly what we were talking about, but Daryl, our second resident, he's 60 years old, and he said, you know, I knew God's people were out there, but I didn't know any of them until I started working at Bridgebread and HomeFirst. That's love. The great thing about HomeFirst is that we're able to demonstrate love in an intentional and impactful way. In a world where it feels like we've been forced to be suspicious and cynical, we're able to offer change to guys who are ready to work for it. We're not about handouts, and we're not about giving out free houses. We do not have to put ourselves in a position where we feel we're taken advantage of. Showing love to our residents, to us, means helping them gain skills, confidence, and support that they need to do it themselves. That is love. And I believe that when we give our time and our love to something like this, really cool things can start happening. Residents have begun to have better relationships with their family members. Bankers find their calling as amazing mentors. We raised $4,500 that we needed to complete our emergency roof fund in just 6 days. We're in the planning stages for securing our next property, and I look forward to seeing the cool things that start to happen with that. So I want to challenge you all to find ways to show love this week, both inside and out. Find ways to show love to the people in your family, strangers, and even maybe that person at work who gets on your nerves a little. I also want to encourage you to become more involved in any one of the missions that have been talked about over these several weeks. Be willing to get into messy relationships with people in order to make a difference. And I would love to have more conversations with you about that. Be willing to go beyond the short-term commitment and work with us to help change the world, because that is love.
Amen.